2 years ago, a 37-year-old woman disappeared from her home in Clyman, Wisconsin, after what appeared to be a normal afternoon spent with her estranged husband, leaving her family without answers and a community struggling to understand what had happened to her. Police arrived at the property within days and found the husband standing outside, calm and composed, near a burn pit in the yard. He told them he had not seen her in weeks and claimed she had done this before. At the time, investigators had no reason to disbelieve him, but the detectives who remained on the case refused to accept that explanation. What they uncovered over the following months was not evidence of a woman who had walked away from her life, but a burn pit containing charred bone fragments, pieces of a human cranium, and a single tooth, the one piece of evidence that could not be reduced to ash no matter how long the fire burned. The suspect had not fled the state or changed his name. Instead, he remained in the same county, living his life as though nothing had happened, spending her money, sending fake messages from her phone to her friends, and standing in his own yard when officers pulled into the driveway. He believed the fire had taken care of everything. A single tooth proved him wrong. Before we go further into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if cases like this matter to you, subscribe now so you don't miss the next part of this case. Wisconsin has two kinds of places. There are the cities, Madison, Milwaukee, places filled with traffic, noise, and the kind of anonymity that allows people to disappear into a crowd. And then there is everywhere else, the counties that stretch between them, flat and wide, farmland broken by tree lines, gravel roads, and small towns where the entire population fits on a single census page. Clyman is one of those places, a village in Dodge County, about an hour northeast of Madison, where fewer than 400 people live across miles of quiet roads and rolling fields. It's the kind of town where you know your neighbors, not because you want to, but because there are only so many of you. A new face gets noticed, a missing one gets noticed too. Eventually, it is not a place that expects violence. That is part of what made what happened here so difficult to understand, not because small towns are immune to darkness, but because they are often convinced that they are. Crystal Rasch was 37 years old, and she had lived most of her life in this part of Wisconsin. She was not a woman with a complicated public profile or a life that drew attention. She was ordinary in the best sense of that word. A mother, a daughter, a woman with a stepmother who worried about her and friends who noticed when she stopped sounding like herself. She had 4 children. That relationship between Crystal and her kids is the thing that the people who knew her keep coming back to, because the story of those children is also the story of how hard Crystal's life had become and how hard she was still trying. The state had removed her children from her custody years before her death. It is a detail that was used against her during the trial. Her own parenting held up as evidence of something, though what exactly was never made clear, because every time the defense tried to make Crystal's struggles the story, the witnesses pushed back. What they described was not a mother who had given up. What they described was a woman who showed up every single Monday without fail to see her kids, who maintained that relationship through everything, whose 4 children were ultimately adopted by a woman so devoted to keeping Crystal's memory alive that when she took the stand at trial, the courtroom felt it. Her children's father, her husband, had largely stopped making contact with them by then. The prosecutor said it plainly in his opening statement. Crystal was not a woman phasing out of her own life. She was a woman still fighting for the parts of it that mattered most. She had an attorney. She was looking for a new apartment. She was building something from the pieces of what the marriage had left her. She was almost there. But to understand June 11th, 2024, you have to go back further. Because that morning did not come out of nowhere, Crystal and Zachariah Rasch had been together for years. 2 people in a rural Wisconsin county, bound together by children and property, and the particular gravity of a long relationship that had turned dangerous. The first time Crystal tried to leave was 2019. She filed for divorce. She documented in court papers that he had threatened her with abuse. Then, as happens more often than most people realize, and for reasons that are never as simple as the people on the outside want them to be, she went back. Leaving an abusive relationship is not a single decision. It is a process. It requires money, somewhere to go, a support system strong enough to hold when the pressure of going back becomes unbearable. Crystal knew this. On some level, she had always known this. In September 2023, she filed again. This time, she also filed for a restraining order. She was building a legal wall between herself and the man she had spent years trying to get away from. She had attorney David Lang working her divorce case. She was looking at apartments. She was done. And the court was moving too. By June 2024, the state was in the final stages of terminating Zachariah's parental rights to their children, a process he could not stop, a consequence he could not negotiate away. He was losing the divorce, he was losing the children, and Crystal, for the first time in years, was close enough to freedom to see it. On June 11, 2024, she got into his car for what would be described as a morning of trying to meet with attorneys about the divorce. She was wearing a black Wisconsin Dells sweatshirt. The surveillance cameras at a Culver's in Oconomowoc picked them up first, then the Goodwill down the road. 11 a.m., the two of them moving through the store separately, two people who could no longer stand to share the same aisle, leaving together at 11:30. That is the last image that exists of Crystal Rasch. After that, the record goes quiet. Except for one thing, that same evening, on a device traced back to Zachariah Rasch, someone typed a search into Google, "Will a 9mm kill an animal if shot to the head?" That search was not the first one. That is what investigators discovered when they pulled the full history from Zachariah Rasch's phone, because what he typed on the night of June 11th was not the beginning of something impulsive, it was the end of something that had been building for weeks. His phone showed searches about 9mm suppressors and silencers, concealed carry classes, how to disguise a voice on a phone call, how fingerprints work, how to track a cell phone's location. Read that list again. Suppressors, voice disguise, fingerprints, cell phone tracking. That is not a curious man browsing the internet late at night. That is a man building a checklist. A man who had already decided what he was going to do and was working through the details of how to do it without being caught. One of the searches investigators presented to the jury asked simply, "Do you die instantly from a gunshot to the head?" He owned a Taurus 9mm handgun. During the weeks Crystal was missing, he sent photos of that gun to his own daughter, in the same messages where he asked her whether she had heard from her mother. The same gun, the same daughter, the same conversation. After June 11th, the searches shifted. Now it was carpet cleaner, stain remover, drain opener. He went shopping with Crystal's money, chemical-resistant gloves, liquid drain opener, a Hoover spot cleaner, turtle wax, OxyClean carpet cleaner, Ozium auto air freshener, OxyClean wipes. Every item on that receipt is a confession without a signature. Each one tells you that something had happened inside that property that required industrial-grade chemicals to erase. Crystal's bank account held over $8,000 on June 11th. Within 2 weeks, it was under $3,000. He was spending her money, draining her account, buying cleaning supplies with the debit card of the woman whose remains were in his yard. And nobody had reported her missing yet. 12 days. That is how long Crystal Rasch was gone before anyone called law enforcement. 12 days in which Zachariah Rasch moved through Dodge County like a man with nothing to hide, buying cleaning supplies, withdrawing cash, messaging women he was interested in, and performing the role of a confused, abandoned husband whose wife had simply walked away. He was good at it. On June 20th, 9 days after Crystal disappeared, he messaged a woman named Arlene Bowman. He told her he was single. He said Crystal had cheated on him. 9 days after he killed his wife, he was already building the next chapter. Then on June 23rd, a Facebook account appeared, one that looked like it belonged to Crystal Rasch. It sent messages to her friends and family. It said she was fine, that she needed space, that she would come back when she was ready. The account had almost no activity, only one friend, no history. It was not her. Anyone who actually knew Crystal could feel that immediately. The voice was wrong, the timing was wrong, but it was enough to buy a few more days of uncertainty for anyone who wanted to believe she had left on her own terms. Crystal's stepmother was not willing to believe that. She had not heard from Crystal in 12 days. Every call went straight to voicemail. She drove to Crystal's apartment and found her car sitting in the garage, untouched, exactly where it had been on June 11th. She called Crystal's brother in Michigan. He said he had not seen her. On June 23rd, she called the Dodge County Sheriff's Office. A deputy drove out to Wood Road. Zachariah Rasch was standing outside. He told the deputy he had not seen Crystal, told him she had done this before. He was calm, composed. He had been rehearsing this moment for 12 days. But investigators went to Crystal's apartment anyway, and what they found there was the detail that refused to fit his story. Her calendar had not been updated. Her medications were still on the counter, untouched, exactly where she had left them on the morning of June 11th. Women who disappear by choice take their medication. The missing persons case was quietly becoming something else. The investigation that followed would eventually span 2 counties and pull in close to 100 law enforcement officers. But it did not start that way. It started quietly, with financial records, surveillance footage, and a man who kept lying every time someone asked him a direct question. Investigators pulled Crystal's bank records. What they found was not a woman who had taken her money and started over somewhere new. It was a spending pattern that told a completely different story: withdrawals, purchases, transactions made by someone who was not Crystal Rasch but was using everything she had left behind. They pulled the surveillance footage. They matched the face. They brought Zachariah in, showed him the images. He denied it, told them he had never touched her accounts, never used her cards, had no access to her money. They showed him the footage of himself making the purchases. He admitted he had been lying. That was the first crack. And once it opened, investigators moved fast.
You've also told me when, at the beginning, I have my account, she has her account, right?
Yeah.
I would not use hers, she would not use mine. Now we know you were using hers, right? Yeah.
They executed a search warrant just after midnight on June 26th, 2 locations simultaneously: the Wood Road property in Clyman and a second property in the town of Springville in Adams County, owned by his family, sitting off the main road, out of sight from any passing vehicle. Crystal's phone had last pinged a cell tower in Adams County, near where his family owned land. At the Springville property, parked behind trees and deliberately hidden from the road, they found his 2023 Mitsubishi Eclipse, the same car that had been on camera with Crystal at the Goodwill on the last morning she was alive. Inside the car, blood, multiple splotches on and around the passenger seat, the kind of volume that does not come from a small cut or an accident. DNA testing confirmed what investigators already suspected. It was Crystal Rasch's blood, her blood. In his car, the car she had last been seen getting out of on June 11th. They went back to Wood Road near the rear of the property. They found it, a patch of ground that looked different from everything around it. Scorched, cleared, the earth itself changed by something that had burned there long and hot. They marked the location, secured the scene, and came back 4 days later with a medical examiner. A medical examiner knelt over a burn site on a quiet property on Wood Road in Clyman, Wisconsin. Zachariah Rasch had been thorough. He had built a fire and let it burn. Then he had gone further, pouring liquid drain cleaner directly onto the site. Concentrated sulfuric acid, over the ground, over whatever the fire had not finished. Fire and acid. He had used both. He had done everything a person does when they are trying to make another person disappear so completely that there is nothing left to find. He was almost right. In the ash, investigators found bone fragments, small, charred beyond easy identification, the kind of remains that told you something catastrophic had happened here but could not, on their own, tell you who. And then they found the tooth, one tooth, whole, pulled from the ruins of a fire that had been designed to leave nothing behind. Acid-resistant, heat-resistant, the one piece of the human body that refuses to be erased no matter how long the fire burns. A forensic dentist examined it, compared it against Crystal Rasch's dental records. It was hers. One tooth was what remained of a 37-year-old woman who had been 3 months away from a new apartment and a life without him. One tooth was the single thing Zachariah Rasch had failed to destroy after everything he had done to make sure she would never be found. He was arrested on June 26th, initially on fraud charges for draining her accounts. The homicide charge came in September 2024, and then in June 2026 it went to trial. 7 days. That is all the state of Wisconsin needed. Zachariah Rasch pleaded not guilty to first-degree intentional homicide and mutilating a corpse. His defense built its entire case around one idea: that without a complete body there could be no certainty, that the evidence was circumstantial, that reasonable doubt existed, that Crystal's death could even have been a suicide. The prosecution did not argue with that framing. They simply buried it. They showed the jury the goodwill footage, 2 people leaving a store together at 11:30 in the morning, one of them never seen again. They showed the Google searches, the suppressor research, the concealed carry classes, the voice disguise queries, the "do you die instantly from a gunshot to the head?" All of it time-stamped to weeks before June 11th, which meant this was not rage, this was not a moment, this was a plan, written in search history, executed on a Tuesday morning in Oconomowoc. You do not research how to silence a gunshot if you are planning to be the one who is shot. They showed the receipts, the gloves, the acid, the carpet cleaner, the air freshener bought with the dead woman's debit card the morning after she disappeared. They showed the fake Facebook account, created in her name on the same day she was reported missing, sending messages in her voice to people who loved her, buying him a few more days of cover. They showed messages he sent to his son, blaming Crystal for signing away his parental rights. His parental rights had not been signed away. They had been terminated by a court 6 days after he killed her. The defense asked for a mistrial. The judge said no. On the final day of trial, Zachariah Rasch took the stand himself. The jury began deliberations at 3:45 in the afternoon. They were back in just over 2 hours. Guilty. First-degree intentional homicide. Guilty. Mutilating a corpse, Judge Brian Fitzinger revoked his $1 million bail on the spot and remanded him into custody immediately. The man who had stood in his yard when the deputy pulled up the driveway, who had sent fake messages in his dead wife's name, who had poured acid on her grave and spent her money and looked investigators in the eye and said he had no idea where she was. 2 hours was all the jury needed. Crystal Rasch's 4 children now have a family. A woman who loved their mother enough to raise them sat through 7 days of testimony about what was done to her, about the burn pit, about the acid, about the tooth in the ash. And she did not look away. Crystal never made it to the new apartment. She never finished the divorce she had fought twice to begin. She never got the life she had been building piece by piece from the wreckage of a marriage that had been dangerous for years. But she did not disappear, not the way he planned, not completely. A single tooth in the ashes of a burn pit on Wood Road in Clyman. Wisconsin made sure of that.